Hey, it's editing Sheeva here to tell you about a technical issue that happened when we were recording this interview with Under the Microscope. So, what happened was we were recording this session, and we had already tried to record the first session. And Edgar, who is the graphic designer for Under the Microscope, I should say also, Under the Microscope is based in Africa, with two of the people based in Kenya and one of the people based in the US, but Kenyan. So the first time we tried to record, Edgar was in a rural area in Kenya, and I guess they had like no internet because he tried to sign on with his smartphone, and then he couldn't. He was talking, and then he immediately dropped off. And so then we rescheduled for the week after that, but then we couldn't do that either because of some issues with like the water quality in Kenya. And then this week we recorded this and we got Edgar's talking, but he unfortunately dropped off due to a power outage. So I'm pointing all of this out just to prepare you for the interview. And then the other thing is that Edgar shows up as a black box in the bottom right of the screen. I tried to figure out a way to fix that in Canva, but the properties, the dimensions of the Canva screen and the video dimensions are not the same. So, um, this is a really great conversation. I think you'll really enjoy it. We talk about representation in STEM, the importance of science communication, and having a global perspective. And I wanted to refine my thoughts that I said in this video. um, we talk about like adding perspectives to the conversation, but it's more like perspectives are often excluded for various reasons, such as there's no internet access. So I think that one challenge that I have for all science communicators is to think of yourself as just a small piece of the puzzle. What you do doesn't have to be the like right way to do science communication. So there's other ways. So have an open mind and um, I think that's a great perspective to approach this video because the technical problems were honestly really frustrating, but we did it, and I'm happy to share this with you. And we're all really excited to share this with you because it was several weeks in the making. And by the way, if anyone else wants to chat with me on the Fancy Comma YouTube, please feel free to reach out. Go to fancycomma.com/contact. Get in touch with me. I'd love to interview you and talk to just anyone that wants to chat with us. So enjoy this interview with Under the Microscope, and thanks for watching. Hi, and welcome to the Fancy Comma YouTube. I'm lucky to be joined today by three members, all Kenyans, of the African nonprofit Under the Microscope, which seeks to encourage better living through science, support knowledge-based and innovation-led communities in Africa, make science accessible and inclusive, and position Africa as a global frontier in science and innovation, among other goals. I'm joined by three members of Under the Microscope: Stephanie Okeyo, its founder, artist and scientific creative; Edgar Omweri; and Grace Kago, Programs and Partnership Manager. So I first wanted to start off by noting that we planned to record this interview last week, but it was raining where Edgar was in rural Kenya, and we had to reschedule due to connectivity issues. Digital infrastructure, access to internet, electricity, phones, reliable wireless systems in general can be less in rural African areas. We ourselves had this barrier because of the rains that affected connectivity. Stephanie, Edgar, you're both based in Kenya. In what ways has internet connectivity affected your ability to do the things you do with Under the Microscope? And also, what exactly do you do with Under the Microscope?
The second question is a long one. So under the microscope does a cocktail of activities. But if I was to summarize it, we center science communication and public science engagement, and see how do we make science relatable to people, with and for people, and how do we make science also connect to society. So in summary, how do we bridge that gap between science and society, and can we do it in different ways where we have a four-pronged approach. In our projects, we aim either to educate, mentor, network, or innovate, and this could take place in either trainings, mentorship, outreach programs, yeah, within that space. In terms of connectivity, I think it's to see how, I always say it's evolution. of communication, but in this discussion, I'll say evolution of science communication, because traditionally how we do communicate science has changed, which had a more in person or a journal aspect. And right now, there is a lot of science communication happening or speared by internet. So this could be through webinars, could be through workshops, could be through social media like Instagram, YouTube Lives, TikTok. And for us, still, there's a question of digital divide. So even though the platforms or the channels for communicating have increased, in some parts it has increased digital divide and also accessibility, because we have to, like, for under the microscope, I'll use and I'll go home in terms of the work we do, is we need to consider the area we're working with. Do people have internet? Do they have phones in the first place? So for example, most student projects cannot have or mainly depend on a digital platform or channel, because this is just not accessible for them. So for us, still the traditional way in terms of outreach and being in person, or even giving this infrastructure in terms of phones or tablets or a projector, is still one of the ways we do that. And also for knowledge exchange, it can be limiting sometimes because of internet accessibility of either the team members or the participants, as we experienced the last time with Edgar. Yeah.
Just to add on what Stephanie has said, since we're living in an age where attention is very important, so it's best if you have a good telecommunication infrastructure in places where you're headed. But mostly in Kenya, you can say urban centers or in urban places, it's a bit easier to work as compared to rural areas, since we have to fight a lot with the telecommunication infrastructure, and you end up transacting a lot in terms of cost and time. So I think we face a lot of issues when we head to these places, and find it a bit hard when we want to do some communication. So we reverse back to the traditional ways of doing things.
Maybe I could just add something, and Grace School also has like experience with this. I think there is a plus to it, because there always wish it's very important to give the pro of sometimes challenges. And I think for us, the thing with outreach is it really needs you to think about your strategy in terms of how you're going to connect with people, how you're going to evaluate impact, or how you're going to do your activities. And sometimes I think with internet, those are easy things to forget. So I think the challenge also has been a pro for us, or an opportunity for us to shape our activities that align to the need of our target audience. So there is a plus to that also, because it's so easy to be like behind a screen and do the work and think of, oh, how many people watched it, or this are the number of likes it has. But really connecting with the people and outreach, you're not able to escape that. It's something you have to do.
I think Edgar mentioned that I kind of just want to ask him about, he said that because the digital infrastructure has some challenges, sometimes you go to traditional means. I'm just wondering what kind of traditional means are involved there. I have talked to other Africans on our YouTube, and some things that they do is like writing about science in regional languages, or using regional dialects to sell a product or something. What are some ways you've been able to kind of go beyond digital and be able to still be effective?
For instance, I think like there's a face-to-face chat where you have to talk to the person, you have to understand their stories, you have to share a lot. So there is face-to-face chat, and it is actually, it's a bit easier compared to when you are talking over the phone. It's easier to see somebody's expressions. It's easier for you to be able to reach even the lowest levels that you might find it a bit hard when you're communicating using the digital media. So that is like one of the methods that I can say works very well. And the other one is I can say the other one is participatory theater. That is a good example that you can use to just communicate, because it involves calling on everyone to come and participate. I can't really expand so much because there's a lot I can say, but I think that those are the two that I can say work very well.
I really like that because it's kind of like, I think that's something that everyone that's working in the digital space kind of forgets. And it's great that, and those are the things that that technologies were created to do, is like help people have conversations better. But but nothing beats like a one-on-one, face-to-face, as we say in the US, mano a mano conversation with someone. That's kind of what the goal is with those technologies anyway. So I love that. Okay, so the next question's for Stephanie, who's the founder of Under the Microscope. What are the experiences or reflections that you've had running an agency that's focused on science engagement on the African continent? What kind of milestones, funding limitations, and big opportunities have come your way?
Sheeva, that's a good question. I think I'll use my own experience. So my background is microbiology, but moved to communication. And for me, initially was as for me, I say it's a transition. It was a transition to science education. Right now, I will say I'll do science engagement and communication. But at that point was that there's so much information happening within the scientific community, but not so much a feedback system or conversation, as Edgar has put it, with the public. At the end of the day, I believe we do research for two reasons. One, to satisfy curiosity and understand our world better, and the second is to improve lives and planet and the planet we live in. And so the interesting part is that initially, when we started and exploring this also with Grace, is that it was not easy to define what we do, because there weren't many science communication or engagement organizations or nonprofits or companies in Africa. Not saying that there were none, it was just very limited. And when you come even to Kenya, there were very few. So it took some time for us also to define and clearly state what we're doing. We knew that it's mostly science education, uh, but I think that shows that it's still a new field and a space in most African countries. And this we know by different discussions with people who are also in the same space. I think the opportunities that it's a new space, so it has space for discovery and exploration, um, and also creativity. I think the challenge for us mainly is funding, because if you look at the funding structure, most of it is within an academic or research institution. So we're a non-profit, so we do not fit the structures that receive funding. So I think this is a challenge not only for us, but for many African-based organizations doing this work. And in terms of, but it's hopeful because there is relevance in terms of the work we're doing. Maybe the pandemic showed how important the relevance of uh, public engagement science communication is. Grace could add more on this because she was also within the founding um, phase of this.
So when we met, it is true that we didn't have like a very defined aim, because I think we met because I was very interested in like building journal clubs, like digital journal clubs, so that different people could talk about different papers across the continent. So I was trying to so I was born in Kenya, even though I live away from Kenya, and I was like, okay, I'm really trying to figure out if we can have like digital journal clubs. So I reached out to several professors, and I was like just asking them, like, do you have any students that would like to do these digital journal clubs? And the one person that responded was like, I don't know that we have that, but what we will do is I can connect you to this science engager. And so that's how I met Stephanie. And so then when we were talking about this program, we were really, we spent a lot of time trying to define, like, what are we doing? What is Under the Microscope for? Who is it serving? What is our goal? And so it was a really cool evolution process.
Stephanie, so what are you looking forward to in the future for Under the Microscope now that you've gotten past the COVID pandemic with this focus on science communication?
I will challenge to have this answer from everyone because within UTM, we say that uh, our team success is not one person, it's usually a whole team. It takes a whole team. But from an individual aspect, I think it's to pave for the way for other people who do what we do. So creating support systems for other science communication practitioners or engagement practitioners. The other thing that we're also keen with, which Edgar could explain further during this discussion, is that we want to different diverse voices in science, because science does not happen in a silo. It's like a lab. It's the way you do a lab, something in a lab, and then you take it to the outside world, and then you're like, oh my, I didn't consider all these factors. So we want to encourage that sense that is outside the lab. So for us, would be more academic research partnerships in terms of this space, and also bring about artists and creatives, because the artistic community has so much to offer when you talk about science communication and public engagement, which is not really seen. So I think it's to redefine or reimagine who talks about science, how science is, or how people contribute to science, and also how people evaluate the impacts of science. Yeah, so for us, it's to pioneer in that field, but not only pioneer, but create supporting systems for other people who do what we do, and other people interested but don't fit an academic structure, because the academic structure is already there. So I think for us is mainly of these diverse voices outside the scientific community, but with the scientific community, because at the end of the day, one of our values is it should be evidence-based.
So next question's for Grace, who's the scientist. What's your experience been translating concepts from technical audiences to non-technical audiences across different languages and among interdisciplinary teams, including graphic designers?
I should probably also say I don't think I introduced my role at Under the Microscope. So I am the programs and partnership lead. So I am responsible for trying to think about ways that we can connect with different people to achieve our goals. And so one thing that I really hope to see happen with Under the Microscope is that we are able to be like the nexus of connection across different places. So one thing that Stephanie really, really values and she like tries to get us to think about is about how are we actively doing things to bridge the gap between technical and non-technical audiences. And so I think one dream that I can say that I have for Under the Microscope is I really hope that one day we will be able to host like a workshop that's like led by artists like in the creative community for scientists, just on something like storytelling, like trying to remind the scientists that storytelling is a tool that they have in their toolbox that they can use to engage audiences who are non-technical. So to answer your question, Sheeva, the biggest observation that I have made so far is that it is very important to think about like the story that you want the recipient to take with them. And that means that when you're presenting things, you can present the facts and the like the foundational principles, but also consider how the audience is going to receive the content. And so this is the case in terms of what type of stories you tell, what type of metaphors you use, what type of mediums you use. Like those are all details that are essential for efficient communication. So that's one observation that I've made. It's not just enough to show up with information. You also have to consider where the recipient is, where what they're thinking about, what they're dealing with in that moment, and then try and integrate all of those things together. So that's the first lesson is I have learned that it is important to consider where your audience is at and how your information is reaching them. The second thing has to do with when you're doing interdisciplinary collaborations, you have to be very clear about like what your role is and then what the role is of the other people. So in my case, at Under the Microscope, we've done a couple of projects where we try to translate the journal papers into content that can be consumed like just on social media. So for example, last year we published a short that was based on a journal article, and we worked with a team of artists. And so my job so my piece was just to think about, okay, what is this journal article saying and what might a non-scientist take from this? Like where might this be of interest to a non-scientist? So that was my first task. And then the second task was to think about how can I make space for an artist to interpret this using their own style and their own understanding. And so I think from that experience, what I learned is that the better job I do at like breaking down the pieces so that the artist can explain, then the better the final product is. So what I learned from that interdisciplinary communication process was to better was a challenge to myself to learn how to communicate in a way that suits the artist themselves. So this means that like I read the paper, they read the paper, they tell me what they got from it, I tell them what I got from it, and then we find a medium. And I found that that was a really powerful way to think about it because I think it gives space for the artist to truly create and expand their understanding of the concept. Then I think the third question or sub answer has to do with my experiences translating science. So I decided to learn my mother tongue a few years ago, and I decided a good way to do that would be to translate science. And so what I have found in that process is very similar to what I found with working with artists, in that if I can break down the pieces to their most fundamental, like rudimentary level, then the better my translation will be. So I think what I can say from my experiences so far is that it's important to understand your material. It's important to break it down to its most fundamental components because that is what helps you to engage with it by yourself and then also invite other people to engage with it. Whether those other people are your audiences, whether they are your collaborators, whether they are translating with you, like all of these different facilities, they depend on you being able to really engage and break down the content in a palatable way.
So you sort of have a very collaborative process with many different stakeholders. So you have Stephanie that's running this, then you have you, Grace, doing the science aspect, and then Edgar as the graphic designer. Edgar, what's your experience working with scientists? What would you like to see more of? How can scientists and graphic designers work better together? What sort of training you would want to have for up and coming graphic designers, and sort of what's your whole idea about working with scientists and in the context of Under the Microscope and in general?
Shiva, thank you for the question. I think the first experience engaging with a scientist, I can say it was a bit hard because I was used to making aesthetic artworks using several mediums. So I found that it was a bit tricky. It was a bit of there was a bit of a problem getting a message from them because of the terminology gaps. For instance, they use a different language compared to us, so it was a bit hard for us to understand each other. Then sometimes the type of style that you use to communicate with them, it was a bit tricky.
I think Edgar dropped off. Maybe he will come back. We'll just wait for a little while.
Hi Shiva, maybe you could cut this part. Edgar, blackout, power blackout.
Oh no. Well, good thing we got him to answer our question then. Is that common in Kenya?
um, no,
Or
it's not as common as in South Africa, which is worse. But sometimes once in a while. I think the area has been having a problem, so there have been several blackouts. So that usually happens when there is an issue, but yeah, we don't tend to have so much blackouts, but it can happen.
well, I'm glad we were able to talk to him for a while. Maybe I can just wrap up this interview because I have been in Washington, D.C. I used to have power blackouts, and sometimes the power doesn't come back on for several hours for a while. So let me just end this conversation by asking you, um, what are you all looking forward to in the future for Under the Microscope? And uh, in the context of all of the different limitations that you face as African science communicators?
Um, First of all, for us will be representation, because that was even the main reason why we started, because we saw few African educators in online. So will be to feature and highlight more African scientists, more African science engagers doing work within the continent. Because this aspect, you can be what you see, and there is some truth to it. So we want our audiences to see Black people, African scientists, both male and female, um, contributing to science advancement. And also, there is this narrative of there is no we're not generating research, we're not generating information and content. Is to change that narrative that also Africa is first of all, Africa is not a country, has 50 plus countries. I think sometimes in a narrative or in a conversation we need to recognize that. And so there is so much to offer, and it's also a contributor, just not we're just not also we contribute to research and advancement of science. And so, number one, representation. Number two would be definition of this space. So our work being seen as important and not as an afterthought, because that's what happens in science communication and public engagement. Even within the research space, it is an afterthought. So contribute to cultivating that cultural transition or behavior culture, that culture whereby science communication is just a by the way, or public engagement is just a by the way, so it's an afterthought. So we hope that UTM could contribute into these spaces in academic and research and an academic areas, in terms of facilitating public engagement and really evaluating impact. And we also hope as an organization to provide data and evidence of the opportunities and challenges in public engagement, science communication. There's so much terminology to this, but at the end of the day, work that bridges gap between people and science. Um, so we do hope also to provide insights and information on this.
I would really like Under the Microscope to play a big part in supporting the integration of the way that people understand the idea of knowledge in general. So one dialogue that we've seen a lot, we've seen that in the US, or we've seen this in the US, we see it a lot in much of discourse when it comes to education. There's this idea that STEM subjects are somehow better than humanities subjects. But I think that that's not really a binary that exists. I think the fact remains that as humans on this earth, we are always trying to understand ourselves, and we understand ourselves in multiple different ways. So all of these subjects have a part to play. And so Under the Microscope in particular has this arm called Creatives for Science. And that's basically one of the mechanisms by which we want to integrate arts in the communication of science, because at the end of the day, like, when we as scientists or science engagers are talking about science, we are not talking into a void, right? We're talking to people who have their own biases, their own understanding, and their own knowledges. And so when we take an integrated approach where we understand people's history and their philosophy and their background, then that makes us able to communicate in more impactful ways. And so I think one thing that we would like to develop in our partnerships and in our networks is an ability to amplify that reality. And so that is why you have us working with, or that's why like you see us here in a very interdisciplinary way. And if you look at our work with Creatives for Science, we work in close partnership with artists because we recognize that that is a very important way to move forward. And so my dream is that Under the Microscope can be part of setting that standard and setting that bar high. And actually, one other dream that I have related to that has to do with teaching scientists who teach scientists how to communicate. Because our work is not just about outward engagement. And like Stephanie said, she would like people to remember that the African continent still has researchers doing research. And so then one place that I think we would like to kind of make an impact in is even in that area as well. And we would like to do that with creatives. And so there's many storytellers that are very good actors and actresses and storytellers that have lots of social media platforms. And several of them are excellent storytellers. So I think a dream in the future might be to maybe host workshops where those people are teaching scientists how to tell stories and how to teach their students. And I would argue that that can help us develop the scientific infrastructure from the inside out. So we are focusing on science engagement outward, like outside the institution, but we're also thinking about science engagement within the institution, within the context of teaching. And so I think and I hope that the work that we do at Under the Microscope will help to kind of put a will help to empower and increase the likelihood of those type of collaborations and connections in our country and on a larger scale in our continent and in an even larger scale like in our world, because at the end of the day we exist in a globe and so what we do has some repercussions in other places of the world. So we would like to set that standard and set that bar. And I'm really, really excited that Stephanie is leading us in that way and in that direction. So I am so excited to be part of this team. And I have lots of really big hopes for us all. And there's like 7 of us on our core team, and we all seem to like share this way of thinking. And so that's always encouraging to me.
And Sheeva, maybe I could end with one of our core values is Ubuntu, which is a Zulu phrase of I am who I am because of who we are. So I think as we all work, and Grace has said that science does not happen in a void, is we go back to the fundamental questions of why are we doing this? How is it impacting people? And all this other, the whys and the who and the how. I think that is the moment we start and we go back to the Ubuntu living, we break down these walls of scientific excellence or barriers in terms of who has access to information, who has not, or who is supposed to speak, the voice behind it. So I think for us is what has always been core for us, for each member is Ubuntu, and knowing that interdisciplinary is the way to go. Even though science and scientific fields are very specific.
Anyone that I'm familiar with the phrase Ubuntu because it's the name of a Linux distribution that I used when I was an MIT student. And I've heard the phrase, I sort of gather that it relates to the community because the Ubuntu distribution of Linux is like very open. I think Linux is open source, very community based, kind of all minds together to work on something. And it's interesting that you mentioned that because that is a really important guiding principle in science communication globally, but in the Western world, we don't have that phrase of Ubuntu. We might have other frameworks, but that's why I think it's so important to add an international perspective to science communication because science, as you mentioned, is happening everywhere. It's definitely happening in Africa and research labs. industry there, and there's a lot that as you're, I guess, grappling with on a day-to-day basis, there's a lot of challenges that you must face, but also a lot of opportunity to help everyone live better lives through science. So I'm really grateful to you for coming on today to talk to us, despite kind of the technical problems Edgar's faced. And I think, though, that really kind of illustrates the challenges that people living in Africa have trying to do this work that we honestly in the US kind of take for granted. So I'm really grateful for this conversation. I'm glad it was possible. And I'm personally going to try to think of ways to incorporate Ubuntu in my work as well, because I've never thought about it as Ubuntu, but it is technically some kind of Ubuntu, and I need to read more about it and figure out what it actually is. But I really do love that guiding framework. And thanks for your time today.
Thank you very much. As we say in Kiswahili, Shiva, thank you very much. Asante, which means thank you in Swahili.
Thanks.